You can
So,
kick off.
good evening, and to everyone joining us from around the world. I am Sheldon Xie, the research fellow at the Center for Globalization Hong Kong, CGHK. It is my honor to welcome you all today as a CGHK Inside Dialogue on the international order of being shaped, the global realignment in the Trump 2.0 area. So first of all, I will briefly introduce our institution, CGHK. We provide ourselves being an independent Hong Kong-based think tank committed to foster high-level dialogues on critical global issues. Our mission is to bridge academia, policy, and the private sectors by providing a platform for robust exchanges of ideas and insights as well. So as we gather today, the global geopolitical landscape is undergoing unprecedented changes in the Trump 2.0 area. And the United States is redefining its global role through the trade wars and tariffs, and the diplomatic negotiation is on its ongoing Russia and the Ukraine, and also the security strategies towards the East Asia, triggering waves of profound changes. The progress of the Russian and Ukraine situation following the U.S. Russian negotiation, also the Europe pursuit of strategic autonomy, and the impact of U.S.-China competition on the global stability are collectively pushing the international order from traditional multilateralism towards a more fragmented and competitive directions. So, in light of this development, we're honored to have an exceptional panel of experts with us today to help us unpack these pressing issues. First of all, we have Dr. Patrick Mendes, the former presidential advisor to the National Security Education Board at the U.S. Department of Defense, and also a distinguished visiting professor as Transatlantic Relations, University of Warsaw, Poland. Please note that Dr. Mendes participates in his personal capacity, and it is not representing the U.S. government or any institution of his present or previous affiliation. And also we have Professor Zhao Daojun, professor of the international relations at the School of International Studies at Peking University. Moderating our discussion today is Dr. Peter Chiu, the chairman and the founder of the CGHK, and also an adjunct professor at the Hong Kong Baptist University, whose extensive experience in global strategy and media ensures a thought-provoking dialogue today. So I will encourage all the participants to engage actively by sharing your questions via the chat box during the Q&A sessions. And it is a great opportunity for us to explore how this global geopolitical shifts might shape the future of global diplomacy. So let me stop here, and I will hand the floor to Dr. Chiu and guide us through this fascinating discussion. So Dr. Chiu, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, everyone. It's a very interesting time. I mean, today, particularly yesterday and today, and maybe around this week, will be very interesting because in this week in Saudi Arabia, in the capital city of Saudi Arabia, both Ukraine and Russia are talking separately to the United States, to the U.S. delegation, in order to talk about sort of ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire, which the United States has been talking with these three mentioned countries for a long time. But the point is very interesting, which is the position of U.S. government. After change of regime, after the election on the 5th of November last year, particularly after 20th of January, after inauguration of the President Donald Trump, the position of the United States towards Ukraine war suddenly has changed. If we say in the way that before, behind Ukraine, there was NATO along with the United States as the leader. Now, to some extent, behind Russia, there's the United States, of the Trump administration. That's number one. So the position of the United States suddenly changed, which made the people around all over the globe, all over the world, to be very confused. Secondly, if we try to focus on, how the constitution will be changed before and after that, when we ask the question, what's actually the point? What's actually the purpose of the U.S. To approach Russia. Many people have been kept saying, behind the activity of the United States towards Russia, of its approach towards Russia, is actually the strategy of the United States try to, if not contain China, but at least try to make Russia as neutral as possible. If the United States will be successful in putting Russia to be making Russia to be more or less neutral, in the more escalation, geopolitical escalation, then things will be totally different. Last but not least is the point. Oh, Dao Jun is off the line. Now, okay, now he's back. Last but not least is the position of European Union. If I may put in a more precise way, is the European Union along with the European countries. Why? Because because of the very special position of UK. UK is a non-EU member state anymore, right? Since almost 10 years. But what the UK has been doing recently, particularly in terms of the ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, is very interesting. France, UK, they are almost the two very active European countries um, in the very subtle interaction with the United States. Why Germany has been kept in a very silent way. Germany, first of all, maybe Germany is still struggling very, very difficult in building its coalition, after this election. Secondly, Germany has always has its own problem in sending troops abroad, in being independent internationally. But UK and France, UK under Keir Starmer, and France under Macron. Recently, there's France has coordinating EU member states internal coordination. In a sense of whether European Union or Europe should be sending troops to Ukraine in order to maintain the peace, which made people to think about where's the future position of European countries, and not to mention that the traditional Atlantic relationship between the United States and Europe will be in a very dangerous position. Now, having said that, we can already imagine what will be the future, the furthermore world order being shaped. Before we have been always say United States is number one, is the only superpower. During the Cold War, there's two superpowers. One is the former Soviet Union, the other one is the United States. Now it's almost 3 decades of the end of the Cold War. The United States has been always the number one and the only superpower. China has been rising, right? China has been rising, and obviously in the last decade, it has been proven to be true that China, luckily or unluckily, has replacing the position of the former Soviet Union. Now we have the almost forthcoming ending of the Ukraine war. Now suddenly Europe and the United States has been separately, will be going in a more separate way, while and Europe and the European Union will be to some extent also arising, to some extent, in its own way, trying to be more independent, in the efforts of making more joint, independent joint diplomacy, in the efforts of making more joint defensive policy. Okay, let me stop here, and maybe it's still too premature to think about or to propose the concept of the forthcoming world order. Maybe it's still premature to say to have such kind of discussion. But let me make some points. First of all, this year, 2025, marks the 80 years of the ending of the Second World War, which means, after the end of the Second World War, we have a new world order, which has more or less collapsed, after the end of the Cold War, and not to mention 30 years, 3 decades of the end of the Cold War. people have been always saying, okay, now it's time to come that the new world order should be coming up. But what kind of new world order? People have kept in such kind of discussion for a long time. So um, all the world order in the history in the last 400 years has been coming always through this or that military conflict. Now is more than 3 years of the Russian-Ukraine war. Even if it is not a world war, right? Is not a global war, but at least it's a regional, very significant European regional war, which has a global impact. So, as I said before, maybe it's still too early to say the new world order is coming up. If we try to look back in another 10 years, saying by 2035, maybe the time will mature. They say, in the last decade, a new world order has been coming up. So maybe it's too early. Maybe it's not too early to have such kind of discussion, to have such kind of discussion. So let me stop here. So I will leave up to you to distinguish as to think about. I might be wrong because I proposed the idea to have a discussion of such kind of being just shaped world order. So you may disagree with me. You may say, okay, Peter, you're totally crazy to have such kind of discussion. Maybe we are right. So I would suggest maybe I will give our two discussion panelists each for about 4, 5, 6 minutes to have your own presentation, and later on we can go into a further in-depth discussion. So maybe Dr. Patrick Mendes, you may have a few minutes remarks about what do you think about it, and then later on, Professor Dao Zhong. Okay, Dr. Mendes.
Thank you, Peter, and also thank you, Sheldon, and also Professor Diogen. I have some kind of connection to each of you from Sheldon from the George Washington University, where I once taught, and Peter, I heard that you also taught at Hong Kong Baptist University, and I was there last year. And then also Professor, I've been there going back and forth to Baptist University for last 15, 20 years when I was also teaching in China. And also, lastly, my former colleague, Professor Diogen from Beijing Daxue, I used to teach in over 25 Chinese universities and national academies, and including CAS. And I'm delighted to see some of the colleagues and former colleagues and friends here talking about what kind of world emerging or shaping. This is a very challenging and uncharted area that we are as an academic talking about kind of world we are going to create or imagine. Having said that, I just wanted to share with you, just like Sheldon mentioned at the very beginning, I share my thoughts in my personal capacity, not the representative or spokesperson for the US government or any of the institution I was affiliated with in the past or currently. Thank you very much again, Peter, just to give the overall kind of panoramic picture about the current situation, what is going on in Ukraine per se, and also I might add in the Middle East situation where the US is also engaged, and also another part I would add to this forces that you are describing is to the trade war that US is also leading in that effort. So what you see is it seems like these are very unorganized. It's a kind of chaotic world that we are living in. But if you look back, there are certain pattern emerge to all of this. So it is one way we looking at is this a new world order emerging, or the past orders are emerging in a different way and different landscape. Let me first talk about U.S.-China relationship, which is the major focus that Peter outlined. If you were to go back to the beginning of the country, when America was created by the founding fathers, 1776. They got inspiration from the China, and also they have a common theme. The Chinese progress and American progress has to be driven by the trade. Trade is the common denominator for the both countries. You know, whether you went to the through the Silk Road to the going westward from Xi'an to or the Admiral Chung He's southern route to the Indian Ocean, what China called it the Western Ocean. So there is a trade pattern existed throughout the Chinese history. So when America was founded, then the interesting part was the founding fathers debated what these new countries, the driving force, the progress should be, especially Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, who are arch enemies, but they agreed on one thing: the trade must be the America's mission. So that was the inspiration also came from, if you look at some of the writing of the Benjamin Franklin and other founding fathers, they found the inspiration from China. And in matter of fact, you may find it the uh, emperors of China, the first ship America had after the American Revolution was to send this ship to Canton, which is modern day Guangzhou, from the New York harbor. And that the trade relationship was the driving force between the Middle Kingdom at that time, Qing Dynasty, and the founding of the United States. So now, when you look at it, that one, at the very beginning, America wanted to have this industrialization. We got rid of the British, the founding mother country, and then we started to have trade with China. And then what they did was they all agreed they wanted to have a tariff. So James Madison introduced that tariff, first tariff, 1789. And then when third President Thomas Jefferson continued, and Alexander Hamilton, and all agreed on a tariff. So that tariff issue was the protectionist policies of the bring the industrial manufacturing sector to the United States. So that part is an American legacy, the founding the tariff and protecting American industries and American export. And also we send our US military to protect American ships. And this evolution was America's progress. And now when you look back, when you say, oh, this is a new thing that Trump administration is putting forward as a tariff policy. It is not really new. It is the old thing that now is resurfing. But the question is the context at that time and the context at the current time, where there is an emerging power and the China's trade relationship through the Silk Road, or the what now called the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, is the trade driven. And they have over 170 countries trade agreements. United States is also a trading nation, both whether it is the Atlantic Ocean side or the Pacific side. So we are both the trading nations. And China also has historically is a trading nation, whether you are going to the Silk Road to all the way to Europe or to the Western Asia and to the Southeast Asia and the Southern South Asia. So you can see this trade is the one also bring people together. At the same time, it can be used as protecting their own economies. So this is the tariff issue that we are talking about. Is not a new thing that President Trump is invoking, but the context is very different. The question is when we put the global trade, where they say all the countries are highly independent than 270 plus years ago when America was founded, is completely different context. So now then when we have an emerging power in China, where there is a trade relationship with whether it is a bilateral or multilateral forum with the ASEAN or the BRICS or the BRI trade relationships, it is a very different kind of very complicated trade relationship. And question is when the America put forward the tariff with other America's northern neighbor, Canada, and also the southern neighbor, Mexico, all the allies and friends in the European countries or the NATO countries, and also the South Korea and Japan, then created a different kind of dynamic. This the protectionist. What would happen? Tic-tac policy is going to continue. It is shrinking the trade flows. And when that is happening, if the China on the other side is going to continue this trade relationship without having any tariff on the countries that China trades with. But there are retaliatory trade tariff is going on back and forth. So now you have to see what kind of implication that's going to bring to the American economy, whether it is going to bring the industrial might, manufacturing might back to the US from the whether it's technology side or industrial textile back that once left the US, and are they coming back? Or the new technology, whether it is electric vehicles or the solar panels or other kind of new technology, are they really coming back to the US? Or it is better for the US to produce around other countries and export? It is kind of the comparative advantage in the David Ricardo's ideas. And all these are kind of upside down because we think that America has this policy. Now it might work in the current context. But the implications are what I'm kind of worried about. That's what we can see whether when they introduce the new tariff policies, what happened to the stock market? And what are the other countries are going to do? And that the kind of situation right now is not world is flat. World is a spike. Each country is bilaterally or collectively reacting to the America's trade policies. That has a far-reaching implication that I think is going to be the driving force in the coming months and years. And second portion that Peter, you mentioned about is the Ukraine war. And where there are that bilateral negotiation where the US is directly negotiating the Russians and Ukrainian counterparts. And having said that one in a neutral country, so-called in Saudi Arabia, these negotiations are taking place. And there are also back channelings going on that what we don't see. For example, British Prime Minister is talking to the both side. Both side mean to the Americans, president, the British Prime Minister having a back channel talking back and forth. And it is not necessarily America alone doing this negotiation and bringing these two partners together, but other countries are also there. So because of this one, the reason is this one, because the European security is a primary concern for the European Union and also the NATO countries. So therefore, there is a great stake on that one that America thinks we are not going to disengage with the NATO countries or the European Union when you come to the military. But America's perspective is, according to a lot of observers, it is let them increase their defense funding and trying to find their own self-defense funding mechanism, not to rely on the Americans and or say, according to the President Trump's, not to take in advantages of the American defense umbrella that has provided like Germany and other countries in the European countries to flourish. And the same thing they argued about Japan because of the Japanese and the South Korea and the Eastern Asian countries flourish because of the defense umbrella that provided by the Americans. So they are now saying, now time has already passed. These countries are developed and competing with Americans. Therefore, they need countries to increase their defense budget. And that was the case that coming up on that part. And the third element I would say about the Middle Eastern war, and also that's also driven by the domestic constituency of the American political voters wanted to have these connections to the Middle East through to Israel. There's long historical connections that America have had and also continue to have. So therefore, these are the three elements which I talk about. One is trade, driving force, and then what happened in the Ukraine might have other implications. It is not the America driving alone, but there are some back channeling going on with the European countries and European leaders and Washington, and the third element of the Middle Eastern. So now we see this is kind of different situations are emerging. And I might add not only the China, but also what the India is doing with their also engagement in the world. They are increasingly engaged in the South China Sea and also in the Europe, and also their partnership with the Americans through bilateral agreements. So there are what we can see, there is the world is not flat anymore. There is a very diverse. And we have to navigate through this. Is the one way to describe is the old theories of international relations or geopolitics is pretty much outdated. As you explained at the initial premise of your remarks, Peter, you laid out these are the issues that driving force. Now, as an academic, my former colleague at the Peking University, and you yourself even try to make a sense out of all these things, how to try to understand what kind of world is emerging. I think I always think predictions are dangerous, especially about the future. It is a kind of contradictory. But what I'm trying to say is when we try to find the future, it never happened. For example, since 1990s onward, you probably remember, Peter, that while I was in China, they was talking about China is going to collapse. Okay, how many times China was going to collapse? It never happened. Okay, and then how many times we talk about there is going to go war in Taiwan Strait, and it's still there. So what I want to say is when we academic trying to find the answers, to find the comfort ourselves, okay, this is the world we are going to live in, let's predict something. I think it is a dangerous things to predict, especially the future. So having said that one, what I wanted to underline is three forces. Main one is the trade brings people together in a traditional sense, because that was the history of China. If you look at it, the Tang Dynasty is going the west, and the Ming Dynasty is going the maritime Silk Road. And then America's founding is the trade is the guiding force, even included in the US Constitution. If you can see the Commerce Clause in the US Constitution, that bind the initial 13 colonies to 50 states together by two words, Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause is the one that binds the United States together. It is the most powerful two words in the US Constitution. When you see that one, that's the United States not only is a philosophy, and they acted on it when we sent that first ship called the Empress of China. So on George Washington's birthday, it was sent from New York Harbor to Canton. And then they are acting on that philosophy. And that was the guiding things for the US-China relationship. I think that is where I would try to focus on whether the US and China can, whether we like it or not, whatever the political and philosophical, ideological differences are, these two nations are bound together from the very beginning. Okay, trade bind together. But can you dislodge these two? Or they need to accommodate, find the way for these two countries to provide the platform for that the trade. In the Chinese history talks about that one, and it is continuing in the BRI. And American US Constitution talk about that one, Commerce Clause, and is still continuing in a different formation from administration to the administration, and even China's one dynasty to the another dynasty, or to the now current administration in Beijing. So this is what I think is the one we need to look at it, because that itself, when the wars are over, Ukraine or the Middle East, then we going back to the very essence of China, very essence of America, which is the commerce or trade. That is going to be the binding force for the better world.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mendes. 这个 commerce and trade are two very important tools and things to bring people together. Okay, Professor Dao Zhong, Professor Zhao Dao Zhong, what's your take?
Well, I have not really followed the everyday news as closely, probably as I otherwise should have. But it does seem to me there is what's going on in association with the war in Ukraine is very much associated with changing redefinitions of order. Order can be highlighted out of that is for the nations that perceive themselves to be at pinnacle of that hierarchy. We look at others as emerging or frontier or threat. But it really is that notion of order and agency or hierarchy. How much of that is what you would call ideology, and how much of that is, let's say, a course in the name of order, the source of, let's say, frictions or differences. And related to that notion of order and hierarchy, you would have assessment of power or capacity, and ignoring the, let's say, how that power, position, or that capacity can be. What I'm really trying to get at is that, look, let's use an everyday analogy. You have a doctor who is very knowledgeable, but then who's very skilled at it. But then how did the doctor become so good at it? It's because patients, because of the medicine. So in other words, when order it discusses the fire when the constant reference to emerging powers, challenging powers, or disruptive powers. I think this is one of the issues that came to my mind. The order can also mean rules and institutions, the interactions to what the basics, what principles, what makes the Ukraine situation different. And most of you, especially Peter, have imaginations very thoughtfully left aside. And then if it's a sort of going to in the direction of saying all the laws, those rules, the UN Charter are can be at least sort of put aside for it. And in some ways it could be insane without seeing some at least acceptance or acquiescence of the idea that winner can take it all. But order, a third dimension, I think this is what we need. Greater level of acceptance in Asia. But wait a minute, there are differences, conflicts, fear, or uncertainty. That's no, that's part of life, it's part of nature, it's part of the basic social fabric. To order can be a state of affairs. Now, the state of affairs, but now by the order, of course, state of affairs, we don't have to accept it, hierarchy. We don't have to accept it. We don't want to accept it. The state of affairs, understand that nothing can be done. But then order in relation to Europe, relation to the Middle East, would be no war, no conflict. Right? So I have noticed that there are three key words practical prefix in discussing the kind of peace in Europe, not just, lastly, comprehensive. There are different. There's some difference in order in the nuance, but those are the key elements. And behind those three characterizations, it's that the end of fighting has to fit in any of those definitions. And of course, as it's true in every situation, just according to whose standard, comprehensive, if it's geographical, or if it's, let's say, military arrangements, or in this nation state. So it's a lot of asking for how long. There are a lot of issues that we negotiate with. So it's a very interesting point of time. And the past 2 months, our previous speaker mentioned, we find a lot of historical precedents. But history made. I am actually not that sure. We're seeing some continuation of public questions, some fundamental discussing for the matters. So let me pause here and think what we can address next. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as Dr. Menes mentioned before, of course, it's too dangerous to predict what's going on with the future, so-called future world order. But let me put it this way. So during the Cold War, now the major difference between different different country factions are ideological differences. On one side is the former Soviet Union, along with communist member states. On the other side is a liberal democratic. In the 30 years after the Cold War, is globalization. That's the golden era of globalization, 1990s, and in the first 10 years of the new millennium. And after the so-called globalization, yeah, there is and also during the globalization, which was dominant was the common interest because the world was peaceful. And now it's the era of the so-called after or nearly after the globalization. Now we've seen different frictions among the countries, and now we have more conflicts. And now we have Donald Trump in the United States since about over 60 years, 60 days, Donald Trump. And particularly in the last weeks, there's a very active interaction between Trump and Putin. Donald Trump on one side and Putin on the other side. It has always been the case that Trump and Putin, they understand each other very well. It's just like two brothers. No matter what kind of political systems they represent, no matter whether they or to what extent they have a different interest, but they are more or less friends. They are more or less, to some extent, allies. So, whether it's correct or not, I don't know. But the chemistry between Trump and Putin is similar, is working to some extent. So now if we add up China, in China, there's also very strong leaders. If we add up Viktor Orban in Hungary, right? Hungary, that is the only member state. Dr. Mendes, you are in Warsaw, you are in Poland. Poland is very different to Hungary, even if you are all former Eastern European countries, right? Now we have Turkey, we have also a strong leader, right? So it looks, which reminds me, I might be wrong again, which reminds me to what's used to be the case in Europe. In Europe 200 years ago, we used to have 5 empires 200 years ago: Russia, Prussia, Austria, United Kingdom, and France, among which only United Kingdom and France, they are parliamentarian democracies. Why the rest of the 3 empires, they are all monarchies. Russia, at that time, there was no United Germany, there was a Prussia 200 years ago, and there was Austria. And then among these 3 monarchies, there's the smallest country, Austria, the then former Austrian chancellor, he was actually a German, Clemens von Metternich. And he proposed very famous theory of balance of powers, and which actually was successful to delay the First World Order to at least 40, 50, 60 years, right? Because the beginning of globalization, the first globalization was beginning in 1820s, and the First World Order began in 1914, right? So, so if we say what's going on now globally is very similar to which used to be the case in Europe 200 years ago. Impression. Of course, the history is still moving on. We can see how the chemistry between Trump on one side and Putin on the other side will be working, not only in the case of reaching the ceasefire in Ukraine, but also in some other cases. But also, let me name one example, which was whom Donald Trump invited to attend his inauguration ceremony on the 20th of January. He didn't invite European country statesmen. He didn't invite Olaf Scholz. He didn't invite Macron, but he invited the Chinese president. He invited the Italian prime minister. He invited, the Argentinian president, and invited still some other statesmen from some other small countries. So no matter whether he no matter whether these countries will have a strategic conflict with the United States, China definitely has a very strong, strategic conflict with the United States. But he did invite the Chinese president to attend his inauguration ceremony, even if Chinese state president didn't come. But the Chinese state president sent the vice president to attend his inauguration ceremony, which gave me the impression that Donald Trump only invited those statesmen to attend his inauguration ceremony, which he likes. Which he likes doesn't mean he likes the state interest, but which means he likes the chemistry of those he invited to attend his ceremony. So if we make an analysis of all these state presidents he invited, we might give the impression these are all, I might be wrong, you can correct me. So if we say 200 years ago, 5 empires were dominant on the European continent or in Europe, Prussia, Russia, Austria, United Kingdom, and France. So why don't we say maybe in the coming decade, United States, definitely, maybe China, maybe Russia and Putin will be also strong with a strong leader. Maybe some European countries, UK, EU, United Nations, United Unions might be dissolved, might be disappearing. I don't know. Just like World Trade Organization, WTO is still existing, but nobody cares about what WTO is doing because no one cares about how globalization is moving on. Everyone is talking about bilateral agreement. Everyone is talking about regional economic cooperation. So Europe is very interesting. From my point of view, I would rather care about which individual European countries will be doing rather than care about how European Union will be doing. France is very interesting. Poland will be very interesting. And Hungary will be very interesting. And UK under Keir Starmer, I don't know how long Keir Starmer will be still staying in his power. If we say he'll be staying in his power for another 2, 3, 4 years, maybe UK will be very different. UK will be playing a very dominant role rather than European Union. So I was also making a metaphor because in a Chinese history, many years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, there was a 战国时代, there was an era of 7 warrior states. Now I say maybe in the coming decades, I don't know, there will be 4 or 5 empires coming up on the world stage. US, China, Russia, maybe some European countries, along with a very small European Union on a primary level. On a secondary level, we still have some other states, some India, as Dr. Mendes you pointed out. Yeah, maybe Canada. I don't know how long Canada will still existing or surviving. Next week, in 3 days, will be election day in Canada, right? Now they have a very strong new Canadian Prime Minister in confrontation with United States. In East Asia, we still have Japan and Korea who are caring very much about how the United States will be doing, who are very much caring about how they can keep balance between China and the United States. Obviously, now the triangle relationship between China, Japan, and South Korea has been restored to an extent. The 3 countries foreign minister just met a few days ago in Japan. Yeah, but we don't know. That's a secondary level. So that's my description. That's my observation and my my thoughts, which are still very immature. So what's your point, Dr. Mendes?
Peter, thank you for bringing up Poland. I've been living and working in Poland, in Warsaw, and also in European countries in the past. And what you said, very interesting observation that three empires controlling Russian and Austrian-Hungarian and also the Russians. And for 120 plus years, there was no Poland. Disappeared from the map.
Exactly.
And then re-emerge. And there is also another observation that all the First World War and Second one went through Poland. So Poland is critical at this point, and that's why the Poland have a very strong relationship with the United States because of the history. Because of that history, that is also the next to Ukraine, and need to have that free and democratic country to preserve that European legacy of World War II legacy, that out of that Eastern European countries emerge into a democratic way of governance. And Poland is critically important to this entire European stability, and in order to maintain that democratic governance in the NATO countries. And that's a very important country to watch, in fact. And also, when you look at it, Poland also is, I would say, rising star in also the economic side, and also the accommodating several million Ukrainian refugees. That is the country that does not have refugee camps, but they have one of the largest refugees in that Poland. While I was teaching in University of Warsaw, these Ukrainian students and faculty, they were in the very beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. There are millions of people came to Poland, and they absorbed and they provided accommodation, but there is no any refugee camps. Okay, this is the kind of the country that uniquely positioned in that Eastern European countries. Having said that one, let me get back to you what you said about the all the monarchies, countries, and also you mentioned about some perspective about globalization. When I was writing about a book called The Globalization, and I traced back to where the globalization started. Globalization started as soon as human being start to walk from A to B. And in the coming civilizations, there are two kinds of people began this globalization. One of the major one is the traders, what you call merchants. And then the second one is the monks, or what we call pilgrims. And the third one is, in order to provide that support from the merchant, they wanted to have a military. So you can see these three forces are continuing. And for example, when you look at it, 5,000 years of Chinese history from the very beginning to onward, and when the Silk Road was emerging, there are merchants that went westward. And then along with the monks went along with the westward, starting from Xi'an to Gansu province to Xinjiang and to Kashgar and to the south in India, and that route, and the Persia. Okay, there is traders and monks, and Buddhism brought into and connected that Taoism, Confucianism, connected by Buddhism. There's three rivers flow in the Chinese civilization. So there are two group of people drove this so-called globalization, merchants and monks. And if you were to look at the American experience, on the other hand, similarly, there are two kind of group of people that drove the American globalization. One is called the colonists, who came from United Kingdom to Virginia. And then came the pilgrims. Then they settled in Massachusetts. And these are the colonists and pilgrims brought the economic dynamism. There's a capitalistic, individualistic entrepreneurship to the nation, and also the pilgrims who wanted to have a spiritual aspect of it. You can see that the two forces are working. If you look at what President Xi Jinping was talking about, BRI, initially, that's an economic development. Then they later on added into the spiritual aspect of the shared destiny. Okay, it is not the economic development per se, material development and progress, but also the spiritual aspect of it. Throughout this one, whether it is religious leaders from the very beginning of the human civilization, it is not the one more recent past, last 200 or 400 or 500 years, but long before that, the globalization has been taking place in a different formation. So now this is the dynamics are very different, more complicated, more sophisticated, and faster than before. Okay, therefore, what we can see is the merchants and monks in China, in the US, colonists and pilgrims on the other hand. And if you were to look at it right now, economic dynamism of Russia, Russian Orthodox Church has a remarkable influence on President Putin and oligarch. If you were to look at America, Christian nationalist has a remarkable influence on electing President Donald Trump and supported by also the tech companies, including Elon Musk. You can see that forces of spiritual aspect or the religious aspect is going along with the merchants and the colonists, which I don't call colonists, but I call it capitalist or venture capitalist. So these forces are at work from throughout the human civilizations. It depends on how you're going to define, how are you going to frame the issue when the history begins. History does not begin from the Tang dynasty, or history did not begin from the Ming dynasty, but long before there were things are happening. Even if you look at the American experience did not happen with the colonists or the pilgrims. Long before that one, more than 500 different Native American tribes were governing themselves and trading each other. So you can see it depends on how you define the globalization and the trading in between and among countries. And now what is happening is this process is accelerating that never had before. You and I can talk from the Warsaw to Hong Kong to Beijing simultaneously. It did not happen 200, 300 years ago. So it is the process in which we are doing things are faster. So in that respect, I may bring up a different way of looking at when the founding fathers were looking at the ancient civilizations. They knew the American experience, the colonists coming in and the pilgrims coming in, American Constitution. This America is the only country in the world was created by people. And other countries, they evolved, the civilization evolved into it. Like a Chinese civilization is evolved from one dynasty to another dynasty to another. America was created. It is a philosophic empire. It has a philosophy and it has a framework, constitutional framework, and they're acting on that one. So therefore, we have to look at it, the reality as it is, rather than we are trying to abstract from the history and trying to fit in into our mental framework, what it should be, not what ought to be, what it is existing in reality as it is. When you understand that part of it, we can see the what would be the emergence of the new world order going to be.
Okay, maybe the last question, Dr. Mendes. Yeah, because Professor Dao Zhong, he wrote us he has a family obligation to attend. Therefore,
Yeah.
we need to get offline now. Yeah. So if you predict in another 10 years, let's say by 2035, time will be quickly gone, right? I still remember clearly how everything was going on 10 years ago by 2050. Now, if we say by 2035, how will you predict how the things, how the interaction between China, United States, Russia,
Peter,
countries,
I think that's an excellent question. What I think is if the current policies were to continue, putting a tariff on American export and import, and America might lose its own identity, what it meant to be an American. Okay, America is a philosophic empire. It is, we don't call it American nation. It's not white America or blue America or Native America or Christian America. It is what we call the American experience. It is a human experience. That was what the founding fathers wanted to create at the very beginning. And America has to be a global nation for them. They came from different part of the Europe, okay, mostly British, but other parts were Americans were there also. So given that one, they created a philosophic empire by looking at the history and drawing from the Greek Egyptian civilizations from the West. And then they look into the Eastern civilization, the Chinese civilization or Confucius civilization. So they bring together. If you go to Washington, D.C., go to the Supreme Court building or the Eastern flag where the sun rises, you can see the plaque. In the middle is the Moses, and the left side, one side is the Sloan, Greek Roman lawgiver. Who is on the other side? Confucius. And not only that one, go back to the American founding fathers, especially Benjamin Franklin, what I call the American Confucius.
I see.
And he, if you work to go back to his writing, and he said someday he would like to see America just like in China. He was comparing China, the Philadelphia, which was the capital at that time, and the same longitude with the Beijing. They were talking about a similar kind of climate, similar kind of fertile soil, and they can grow the similar kind of thing in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. And also you can see that the George Washington plantation or the Mount Vernon, there are flowers and seeds. They wanted to have it from China. Even there are some correspondence between the some founding fathers asking them to bring certain kind of not only the tea or silk or the silverware or Chinaware, but also to America export ginseng, which is still continue to do so from, especially for example, in Wisconsin, which is famous in China. So what you can see is this is a founding fathers were inspired by the Western civilization. They got the best out of it, and also the best out of the Eastern civilization, and they created a new world, new country. So it is an American experience. It is not a country. It is called the American experience. And before that one, before country was founded, America is called the American experience that happened to the colonists and pilgrims coming in. And when we country was started, we had the American experiment. That experiment is what it is happening right now. This is experiment is now is taking place in a very, very complicated way. I remember that our former colleague from Beijing Dashue talking about order
Mm,
and institutions, rule
mm,
of law,
mm,
stability, all are part of this dialogue among American founding fathers. If you look at the Federalist Papers, how do you make the order out of chaos, right? And China has a similar kind of philosophy, but they have a different approach and history and a legacy they have to build on. America has a different story and selected from the Greek Roman civilization and to the Eastern civilization combined to have a order. They have a rule of laws and stability coming out of it, and order came out of this chaos. Because America used to that chaotic part. And also our previous speaker talked about this is the human nature.
mm.
And that the human nature is the very fundamental of the founding fathers. They debate on how this human nature has to be governed, how to be governed within the rule of law in the constitutional framework. That is why I think there's an American experiment. We are hoping continue to be within that rule-based framework is still going to be at work. Whatever the President Trump is going to do, and he has to somehow, one form or another, have to bend into the constitutional framework. So that was the, I think, is going to be the challenge, whatever the world that we are going to see in the future, whether that first test of the executive branch and the legislative branch and the work in the American experiment. So that is, I think, it will decide whether you wanted to talk about whether you wanted to have another system in China or the Russia or India or elsewhere. So I think that one, before we predict 10, 15 years from now or the 2035, I would short term look at it, how the test of American institution is going to survive next
Right,
3 to 4 years.
right,
Okay,
right.
if that American experiment work and American experience going to continue in one chaotic form or another, because America is used to this chaotic nation of screaming and freedom and also expression, and the media talking about make a cartoon about the president and joke about every night. And this is a chaotic world. It is very hard for some countries, some politicians around the world to understand that one, but at the
Yeah, Dr.
same time,
Menes, are you confident that the United States will be surviving its struggling, in this maintaining its traditional constitutions institution? How do you, to what extent, how much do you believe in the internal civilians of the American democracies? Because now we're seeing,
yes.
2/3 of the staff of federal government will be laid off, and there's a deep state, which Donald Trump is going to fight against. People might be living to more or less in a fear. You know,
Absolutely. I mean, it is an excellent question you are asking. You know what happened, when he fired
right?
number of, I mean, a large number of civil servant and even some people in uniform, whether they are in a different sexual orientation and so forth. What happened few days ago, the judges said it is illegal. They need to rehire. So now they have to rehire. Okay,
Mm.
this is the question. Now they are saying they are going to get rid of the Department of Education. Can the executive branch unilaterally get rid of the executive institution, Department of Education, which was created by the Congress? So now this testing of the American Constitution or the constitutional framework is coming into play. So I am hopeful, I'm confident that the American Constitution will survive, and there is no any other way, as you also alluded to the fact that some state legislators and some congressmen and some senators, they have to return home. Within 2 years, they have another congressional election. And now you saw that some states, even some congressmen, Republican congressmen, cannot go and talk to their own voters.
Exactly.
And you see, then you can see they are sending a message. There are a kind of check and balance system. If this is the three branches of government cannot provide that stability and order to the US system, there is another element of the state government, 50 state, and in the local government, where the congressional districts, they are going to be a pressure from the voters to send a message to Washington. This is not going to work and you are going too far. That's already sent a message to Washington. You probably heard about, for example, in Idaho and Wyoming, and even in Wisconsin a few days ago. And these congressmen have to pay the local voters. They have to return every weekend and talk to them. And if there is a protest going to be, this is another check and balance is coming in. They have to respond into the Congress elected people have to respond into our voters. So I think there is somehow this order is going to emerge sooner or later. But this shock therapy is going to be a shock therapy. It is happening right now, last 60 days, as you mentioned at the very beginning. I think that honeymoon period is coming to there are some kind of breaks are taking place in the judiciary branch, and also the people are going to address these issues. If the Congress does not address it, and they probably sometimes take into their own hands, just like you have seen that our Tesla vehicles were burned and they are boycotting buying it. And even more than 90% of the Tesla vehicles are not being bought in European countries. So they are sending a message. Okay. And even in the US, they are sending a message, the voters. And this is very interesting to conclude my comment. And when the country was founded in Philadelphia, one of the lady came out and asked her, what did you guys talk about this constitutional conference? And Benjamin Franklin, the oldest and wisest of the founding fathers, he said, we created a republic if you can keep it, he said. Okay, now we have created the American experience and American experiment in Washington. You have it, the republic, and if you can keep it. So now American voters are now awakening to that reality. Now they have to fight back to the original ideas of the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin. This is the one. Then also the Alexander Hamilton said, who are you afraid of? One observer asked him after Philadelphia constitutional debate. He said, what we are afraid of? He said, the people. People are the greatest beast. So you can see the similar kind of things coming from the Chinese history. Chinese history, you have to be careful for the people. Don't wreck the boat. They can change the boat upside down. So
That's
you
very
can
interesting.
see, yeah, you can see this is a similarities, an anecdote, history. Tell us a certain thing is a Chinese history, and even who are influenced by the Chinese history, American founding fathers are talking about. You have to be careful about the people, the beast, or the republic we created. We give a birth to a republic if you can keep it. So it
Yeah.
is telling us you have to be careful with the waters. I think, honestly thinking, there's a very optimistic note. It's the
Yeah. Yeah.
American experience is taking its form, and now the American people are beginning to speak to the power.
That's very interesting. Let's raise some slightly hope to the internal American resilience. But now, last question from our audience: what are the risks if either global power, which could be China and the United States, attempt to impose its own vision of global governance unilaterally? Because both countries are testing each other. China is watching how the United States will be doing. The United States is watching how China will be doing. If China, along with Russia, will be seeing, United States is doing more weakly, United States will be weakening again, again, again. Maybe China will be starting imposing its own vision of global governance unilaterally. And vice versa will be easier. Yeah, will be the same case. If the United States will be seeing, the communist governance of China will be doing weakly, will be doing badly, then it's a vice versa case. The third scenario will be that both countries are testing each other when either country will be threatening each other, so that at the end of the day will be a balance of power, will be a balance of terror at the end of the day, just like during the Cold War. So what's your take?
That's an excellent question that I mentioned to Sheldon earlier. So what my fear is, when the previous administration, whether it is Barack Obama, so the Biden and the Trump one, we are trying to decouple or de-risking.
Exactly.
When you're trying to decouple, completely separate it, did it happen? The question is no. The answer is no. For example, when there was a sanction and all kind of trade sanction and a tariff during the Trump one presidency, the trade between China and the United States increased. And this is the reality, okay? And that will, whether you are talking about decoupling or de-risking, whatever the words that you want to use it, describe the situation, I think it is very hardest things to do. Having said that one, when we are living in a technological world right now, and we can see the machine learning, AI, and all those things, and now we are trying to create a different ecosystem, the Chinese-centered ecosystem, highly technologically driven. And another one is the American-driven or Western European open ecosystem. That might be a question in a technological drivers. But the question is, both are going to compete in just like the Soviet Union, American time, the Sputnik movement going to the moon. And now we are talking about that kind of technological advancement both countries are trying to do, especially China is trying to increase their AI and advancement of their technology and send into the space technology and outer space, and also the deep ocean. And then the US is trying to go send into the spacecraft to the Mars and created a new kind of weapon systems and so forth. Whether that kind of technological competition, what that going to create in a current context compared to the during the Cold War period? I think we are entering into the different kind of interlocking economic and trade relationship and investment. That is where I think whether the political ideology or the different perspective about the world governance coming into be, but there are interlocking interests are created by the corporate sector. If you were to look at it, investment coming from the BRI, there are Wall Street. And if you were to look at the technological know-how, there are back door and front door technology is leaking. You see, this is very hard to control than during the Soviet Union and American times in the Cold War, because they didn't have much of the trade during that time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right now, these are the two major economies have a interlock in their trade interest,
Interconnected
economic interest, and the investment interest. And the driving force to this one is the transactional or economic interest. Now it brings back to your first remark you mentioned about it, which is very insightful, Peter, when you said that President Trump invited President Xi Jinping, come to my inauguration.
Right.
What kind of message you are sending to
Exactly.
your competitor?
Yeah.
You see,
Exactly.
this is what I think. This is not the Soviet Union and the America in the Cold War.
No,
This
right.
is I have a different much optimistic being in China and working in China, teaching in China, and also in the US, have a different perspective on that one. And really because, for example, look at it in Tsinghua University. You have a Schwarzman College. Okay. And I used to teach an Yenching Academy in Peking University, which is competing with the Yenching Academy and Schwarzman College. Okay. And these are collaboration and academic side. Okay, at the Tsinghua University, which is an American gift to China.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you look at it, when President Trump invited President Xi Jinping, it's sending a very different kind of messages when you're trying to put the tariff and de-risking and decoupling. And the same time, this trade is going between the two countries and investment going two countries, and they are still talking to each other.
Yeah.
So that never happened. That never happened in the Soviet Union time and the
Exactly.
Cold War. So
Exactly.
therefore, I think, which I also wrote a book about, what I call the peaceful war.
Peaceful war.
Peaceful war. I think it was translated to China, and Professor Wang Jisi from Peking University wrote a little blurb for the book,
I see.
and
I see.
I shared with Sheldon. It's a peaceful war is like that. It is not a hot war. This is a peaceful war in the sense we are still talking. I do not need to agree with everything, Peter, what you are saying. You don't need to agree with me. That is the American experience itself. Okay, we don't agree anything,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
don't going to
Okay.
shoot each other. Okay,
Right.
so what I think is what is happening with the China and the US is given all these things, hot exchanges, debate going on, I feel more optimistic about these two countries because we are driven by two countries. If you look at it, some state have more trade relationship with China, like soybean exporting state like Iowa, Wisconsin. Wisconsin is exporting ginseng, and Iowa soybean and corn, and Minnesota, for example, and Virginia is exporting chicken feet, which is famous in China. So therefore, what I think is what is happening is that this is a peaceful war. War is going on ideas and driven by technology. Who can come up with the deep sea or the open chat? Okay,
Yeah.
and they are trying to come up with something better, and they are
Okay.
coming to not to go to the moon, onto the other side of the moon, and not to go to the Mars, we are going to Jupiter, or where else. So this is a kind of competition between which is what I think is make the human experience more innovative, more challenging and driven. But if you can manage that, I think that America's founding vision or the Chinese experience itself is going to continue in a better world.
Okay, that's fascinating. Fantastic, Dr. Mendes. Yeah, thank you for the very constructive and fantastic sharing. Okay, let me ask Sheldon to come up and round up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mendes, and thank you, Dr. John, who was leaving because he has another commitment. But yeah, that's a really fascinating, and also I would say this constructive discussions, because we will go through the Cold War and also the history between these two global powers, and also Dr. Mendes, especially your pointing out the both the founding fathers of the United States, and also comparing that with the Chinese civilization, which is a great comparison when we unpacked the grounds of philosophy, and also like the bottom logic of these two global powers, what their motivation in this emerging global order. So I think it is really insightful, and also I would say it is giving the policymakers or students during the audience will have some lessons or have some takeaways from this. So if you have any questions or shared interest in anything or our upcoming dialogues, please stay tuned to the CJHK's account, and I will see you from the next dialogue sessions, maybe next month, when we have some interesting topics on the Trump administration's tariffs, or new updates from the U.S.-Russian negotiation on the Ukraine conflict. So stay tuned to the latest news on the events. So thanks again, Dr. Mendes. Thank you, Peter, and thank you all of us. Yeah, have a good night, and also have a good rest of the day to someone who were in the other side of the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mendes. Yeah, thank you, Sheldon.
Thank you, thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye bye.
Okay, see you next time. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, see you. Yeah.